21 to 3, civil society organisations representing welfare recipients, First Nations people, survivors of family violence, disabled people and legal experts, they're calling on the federal government to scrap a proposed law due to be considered in the Senate. Now, this is going to involve police and federal government ministers in individual social security decisions. So there's growing calls for Labor to abandon some new powers to stop Centrelink payments for people accused of a serious offence. To tell you more, Kristin O'Connell is a spokesperson for the Anti-Poverty Centre. Hi, Kristin.
Hi, Ollie.
So it's the Social Security and other legislative amendments technical changes number 2 Bill 2025, and advocates have been blindsided by the Schedule 5, which you say does away with the right to due process for welfare recipients accused of a serious offence. Can you explain what is being debated in the Australian Parliament, Kristin?
It would be wonderful if there was debate in the Australian Parliament about this, but just for your listeners to understand, this is actually a bill where the government is supposed to be dealing with its own unlawful debt calculation methods. And that bill has already gone through the process of parliamentary committees and scrutiny. And now, at the last minute, we have this massive overreach by Minister Plibersek, where she's tacked on a completely unrelated amendment, and there has not been any opportunity for debate on it. So what this amendment does is means that welfare recipients who have been accused, not convicted, of a serious offence will actually can potentially have their Centrelink payment cancelled. So it takes away due process for welfare recipients, but it really fundamentally undermines the basis of the justice system in this country.
Do we know what a serious offence is, Kristin?
Yes, so they've got it's fairly broad, although they've tried to make it sound extremely narrow. So they are talking about violent offences, they are talking about sexual offences, and of course we know these are extremely serious offences. There is no debate about that. The concern is that what this does is put people at risk who have not done anything wrong, while at the same time not achieving anything useful to protect the community.
And again, this is not somebody who has been found guilty of those offences. This is somebody that has been accused, somebody that has been charged, Kristin.
That's correct. So it's someone who has a warrant out for their arrest. And I think because this has been rushed through so quickly, the government is really failing to think about the circumstances, the complexities and the many unintended consequences of the changes that they're putting forward. And so, for example, we heard from someone this morning, we had a really heartbreaking story from a mum who many years ago now had one of her children die, and she was later accused and then cleared of murder. But she fled the state she was living in with her other children to escape foster parents who had abused those children. So that mother had a warrant out for an offence that would be captured under these laws.
But not necessarily enacted upon. Not everybody who's accused, Kristin, would have that payment halted?
No, that's correct. So it would correct. But as you can see, in that case, the police had identified this woman as someone who was extremely violent and a risk to her children.
Yes.
So it is the exact example that the government has given of the type of offences where they would want to impose these kinds of rules.
Yes. So, and in that circumstance, just on the surface, and again, this is just me doing it off sort of the back of an envelope, but that sounds like overreach. That sounds like something that has overstepped. And you're saying we want due process, as you have in this country, the right to being innocent until proven guilty.
Absolutely. It is the most basic right that all of us are entitled to, and it is really uncomfortable when we have to think about some of these crimes and these acts. It's difficult, but there are so many tools available to authorities to try and make sure that we are all kept safe, and this is not going to do anything to help with that.
As we're talking, I've just received a statement from a government spokesperson, Kristin, who says if someone is charged with a serious offence like murder, terrorism or child sexual abuse and is on the run, they should not continue receiving a payment from the government. That's attributable to a spokesperson.
Well, I don't think the Constitution cares about whether someone should or shouldn't receive a welfare payment when there is supposed to be a separation of powers and there is supposed to be natural justice. It's not for this minister or for any minister to decide whether it is appropriate or not. We are talking about payments that do not support one individual in many circumstances, right? We have families who will be relying on a payment. We have many people paying rent, energy, phone bills through automatic deductions from these payments, where people who have had no involvement in any wrongdoing are relying on that to keep themselves with a roof over their head and with absolute basics being met.
They say, just reading on, continuing to provide support in these circumstances is not appropriate, but there is currently no legal authority to cancel a payment. The powers will only be used based on expert advice from law enforcement agencies. Advice from Services Australia about any impact on dependents must also be considered if it is a serious power for the most serious of circumstances. Still a fair bit of wriggle room in that, Kristin.
Yes, they really haven't put anything in this to ensure that there is no collateral damage, I suppose. Right. And I think what we know is that, well, whether Minister Plibersek is misleading people about what this amendment will do, or whether she doesn't understand it, is hard to say, because there has been no opportunity for scrutiny. What I think the government is really failing to grasp here is that poor people surviving in complex circumstances do not always have a note on their Centrelink file saying this is what I'm doing with money and how I'm supporting people. It also ignores the fact that if a person is actually using that payment, they are leaving a trail of information through, whether that's through logging in through the Centrelink app, whether that is through using the money through their bank account, which obviously is traceable. So again, none of this makes any sense when you think about it from a logical perspective, and certainly not when you think about it through the idea of that separation of powers that's so fundamental to our democracy.
So just circling back to the start of our conversation, Kristin, where's this come from if it's caught everybody by surprise?
Yes, we would love to know, and we have asked and we have not received an answer. Again, it's just really hard. This government seems to be allergic to scrutiny and to transparency, whether we're talking about this extremely sudden amendment, or whether we're talking about freedom of information laws, or whether we're talking about, I can't remember, there was another example in my head before when I was thinking about how they just seem to run away from any form of accountability. And this is just another example, but I do think it is the most serious one we've seen yet.
Kristin, thanks for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, Ollie.
The spokesperson for Anti-Poverty Centre, Kristin O'Connell, 133 882. The spokesperson for Tanya Plibersek says the social safety net is a pillar of this country and we are deeply committed to upholding its integrity. If someone is charged with a serious offence like murder, terrorism or child sexual abuse and is on the run, they should not continue receiving a payment from the government. Do you agree with that? 133 882. The spokesperson says continuing to provide support in these circumstances is not appropriate, but there is currently no legal authority to cancel a payment. These powers will only be used on expert advice from law enforcement agencies. Advice from Services Australia about any impact on dependents must also be considered. It is a serious power for the most serious of circumstances. But again, this is not somebody who has been found guilty of murder, who has been found guilty of terrorism or child sexual abuse offences. This is for someone who has been charged. So they've been accused, they've been charged, they haven't been found guilty. That's the issue that Kristin O'Connell and the Anti-Poverty Centre have with what is being introduced into the Australian Parliament. Love to know what you think. 133 882 12 to 3. This is hypocrisy, saying police and government ministers, usually when they get stood down, they're on full pay until a determination of guilt or innocence is reached. Totally and utterly hypocritical, Ollie. Hi, Richard.
Yeah, Ollie, how you going?
Good, Richard. What do you reckon?
Look, I agree with your last guest. It's obvious that this is the separation of powers would strike this out if it ever got to the High Court. I mean, simply it's punitive. And I think I'm not a lawyer. My brother was a lawyer, but it's punitive. And the government doesn't have the ability to do that. That's why we have courts. That's why we have the police, and everyone gets a day. And the fact that they're on the run, I don't know, what are they trying to do, smoke them out? Don't get me wrong, I'd be the first guy there with my torch and pitchfork trying to hunt this guy down. but it's not the government's job to arbitrarily impose a punishment on someone who's not been before the court.
Well, as Christian just highlighted too, still if they're accessing the payment, they'll know, Richard, that they withdrew $50 or whatever it is, or used that payment at the local IGO, wherever it is, and go, quick, there they are, let's go, let's get them.
Yeah, look, no, that's a bonus.
Yep.
But either way,
Yep.
the government can't arbitrarily impose punishments on people.
Thank you, mate. Appreciate the call, Ollie. This is the thin end of the wedge, says Steve, 133 882, if you'd like to have your say.